test the LTO mode in a real-world example, we jump back to the Fuzzing 101 repo, in particular to the exercise number 2. But before continuing, remember to start this fantastic repo. So the aim of this exercise is to find a crash in libexif version 0.6.14. And the first things to do is to grab the right version of the library that we want to fuzz. And to do that, we can search for the Git repository on Google, for example, GitHub libexif, and we find the repository. What is libexif? Libexif is a library for parsing, editing, and saving EXIF data. What is an EXIF data? An EXIF data, they are basically metadata, but with information, for example, about the camera model, the author, the exposure time, and many other informations. So this library is just a parser that can edit and save EXIF data. Now that we know what is libexif, we can download the right version. So we go on top of Git and we select in the tags tab the right version that we said is the 14. Now we can download the zip. Once we have the link, we can download it. So we go back to our terminal. We create a folder, fuzzing libexif. And we download the archive. Now we can unzip it. And we go inside the folder. Now we have to understand how to build and install it. So we go back to the libexif instructions in the documentation. There is the building section, and that tell us what we have to do. So the first things to do is to run autoreconf. So we go back here. This command, it's used to forcefully regenerate the configuration files. So for example, the make file, the configure file for a project. Install all the missing auxiliary files and provide the verbose output for the process with -v. If you get any errors, please read carefully the output and you should be able to understand if you have to install some additional dependencies like autopoint, libtool, and so on. In general, these sets should be enough for Ubuntu. So usually on Ubuntu, what you have to do before running this command is to install autopoint, libtool, gettext, and libpopdev. Okay. Now we have the configure script, so we can run configure like in the documentation, but with some extra parameters. So in our case, what we do is to call configure, but first we want to disable the creation of shared libraries, and second, we want to set the installation path. Building a program or a library for fuzzing using static libraries can offer several key advantages compared with shared libraries. For example, with static libraries, the fuzzer directly works with the compiled code rather than relying on dynamic linking at runtime. This makes it easier to isolate the code being tested and control the environment. Static libraries are linked directly into the final executable, meaning everything the fuzzer interacts with is bundled into one binary. making it simpler to manage the fuzzing process. More static linking ensures that the exact same version of a library is used every time, and it can be very useful, for example, when you're using a container for the compilation steps, because we reduce external dependencies and runtime environment setup. Finally, we avoid that the fuzzer might accidentally interact with unintended parts of the system, and we also improve a bit the speed of the fuzzing process. Okay, so the next step to do are make and make install. So we just run make. You can also run make with the J option to use all your threads and be a bit faster. And then make install. If you get any errors related to the docs, you can ignore it. So for example, here you can see that there are some errors for the docs. Now, since libexif is a library, we need another application that makes use of this library and which will be fuzzed. So we can look again to the Git repo of libexif, and we can see that there are listed some in the front-end section. For our fuzzing, we can write our front-end, or we can use one of the existing one. In that case, we select the easiest option, that is to select the first one. For example, exif. As you can see, exif is a small command line utility that shows exif information hidden in JPEG files. I wrote it to demonstrate the power of libexif. Okay, perfect. Now, since we are trying to reproduce an old bug, the tricky part is to find the correct version of exif that uses the right version of the library that we want to fuzz. A quick and dirty way to do it is to check the date of the last commit of the version of libexif that you want to use and find the corresponding version in the front end. So for example, if we go back to libexif in the tags and we select our version that we say it's 14, we can check in the commits and we see that the library, the last commit was in 2007. Now, if we go back in the exif, we can search a tag with a similar date. So in that case, it's 2009. Maybe it's too new. Let's try with this one. Okay, May 2007. May 2007. Okay, and the front end, exif, is after the commit of the library. So it looks good. Okay, so again, we have to download the exif2 and compile it. We select the right version. That we said it's 15. We copy the link. And we download it. Again, unzip. And we go inside. Okay, how to compile it? We can go again in the documentation, in the README, and we see that the procedure is really similar to the previous one. So autoreconf. And then we have to run configure. But this time we have to be careful because we have to specify the path to where the libexif is installed. If it's installed in a non-standard location, that is our case. So this is the command that we have to run. We have to run configure, again, without shared libraries. This is where we want to install it. And this is the path where we have installed libexif. Again, if you get some errors, please be sure that you have installed all the dependencies. Now, simply make, okay, there is an error. Okay, yes, this is the error. I wrote the wrong path. Make. And this time it should work. Yes. Make install. Finally, we can test if everything is fine, calling our binary. That's in my case, it's in the home directory, fuzzinglibexif install bin exif. That is the path that we configured in the when we run the configure script. So we are getting the help of the command. So I suppose that everything is correct.